Welcome back to Glimpses of a Possible Future, brought to you by Makespace Oxfordshire. We're celebrating a handful of local projects that inspire us, great examples working towards spatial justice. Welcome back to Glimpses of a Possible Future, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Micaela Tuckwell, Executive Director at the Ultimate Picture Palace, an independent, community-owned cinema in East Oxford, affectionately known as UPP. I'm really looking forward to this conversation for lots of reasons. I've been visiting the cinema ever since I came to Oxford more than 17 years ago. I've lived just around the corner for a number of years and always got to walk past the beautiful Art Deco frontage that looks out onto Cowley Road. And I've been following its journey into community ownership very closely and find it a very special story. So I'm really excited to bring it to you all. So first of all, a very warm welcome, Micaela. Thank you for being here. In this conversation, we'll be deep diving into the place and the project, which holds more than 100 years of stories, and we'll be unfolding some of that history and hearing a bit about this much-loved community asset and third space, which is located in the heart of a really diverse and bustling place that is Cowley Road. And for those that are less familiar with East Oxford, Cowley Road is at the heart of what's proclaimed by the street art as you cross over the bridge from central Oxford, the sunny side of the city, known for its independent bars, shops, cafes, markets, and community spaces, and of course the wonderful Cowley Road Carnival. It's a place where students, local residents, and a wide array of diaspora communities come together. UPP is a gem right in the midst of it all, a home for independent film and so much more. At a time when we're seeing the closure of so many independent shops and community spaces, the sale of public land and buyouts from colleges and universities, it feels particularly important that we celebrate the special places that are bucking the trend. And as we'll get to hear very shortly, this is a particularly important moment in UPP's long history. So Micaela joined as Executive Director in 2019, having worked in and led a number of really important community initiatives across Oxford City, including the community arts charity ARC-T, Cowley Road Works, which leads the Cowley Road Carnival, Oxford's largest free community arts festival, the Oxford Story Museum, and the education charity Jakari. So you've earned your stripes in the community sector, I think it's fair to say. But without further ado, and to dive into it, perhaps we can just invite Micaela to share a little bit more about the kind of maybe some of the highlights of the Ultimate Picture Palace's history, how it came about, what it does and how it does it.
Hi, Andy. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. And what a nice introduction I've just had. So, talking about the Ultimate Picture Palace, where do I start? It's got a very rich and diverse history. So it's one of the very oldest cinemas in the country. It's definitely the oldest cinema in Oxford. It was built in 1911, so at the very start of when cinema was coming to its coming to the forefront. It's always been sort of nestled in the heart of the community in East Oxford. So generations of students and residents have always loved and gone to the UPP. But it has had a checkered past, I'd say. I think it's fair to say. So in 1911, it started and it was unfortunately closed in 1918 because the owner at that time got called up to the First World War, and so the doors shut, and it was sort of mothballed until the 1970s, when it was revived by a local student called Bill Heine, who some of your listeners might recognise. He's the guy who is a BBC journalist and has the Headington Shark House that is famous. And he decided, actually, you know what, Oxford needs an art house cinema dedicated to showing some of the wilder kind of films that were happening at the time. So he and his buddies started to put in a 35mm projector and started showing some fantastic array of films from the 1970s. But they got into a bit of trouble with Stanley Kubrick and his lawyers because they'd just released Clockwork Orange, but then they pulled it because of some legal problems. And Bill decided that he wanted to show it anyway. And he showed the film, and Stanley Kubrick's lawyers got in touch and said, "Look, we're going to shut you down." And unfortunately, the legal costs meant that that Bill had to sort of sell the cinema. And so this has been sort of the story of the cinema has been just this. It's been sort of struggling for survival for quite a long time. There's a really great documentary about it called The Ultimate Survivor that you can see on our website. But today, the cinema has been much loved for the last 20 years of its existence as the ultimate picture palace. And it's a place where you can see new films, old films. We really prioritize sort of affordability and making sure that it's a welcoming space. We are run by a small team. We have 40 volunteers as well. You should come down and watch some films.
Everyone should.
Yes.
Absolutely. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Really comfy seats. You can get some beautiful drinks.
Yeah.
And it's still got the original frontage, which I think is just part of its charm and its character.
It is.
Right?
It's a grade 2 listed building, and which says a lot because, we used to have lots of cinemas in Oxford and throughout the UK, but they've now, lots of them have been demolished. So it's a really special place in lots of people's hearts.
Amen to that, for sure. Yeah. And I was just, thinking back as we've been talking about some of the highlights of, programming that you said you've been doing, really high-profile films, beautiful art house films. But I think some of the community projects that you support are the things that really stand out for me. I was thinking back to 10 years ago now, a wonderful set of films called Not Just Homeless, which was produced with local precariously housed and street homeless individuals through Insight Share using sort of participatory video techniques. And it brought together their stories in a really powerful way. And again, from people that were kind of living in and around East Oxford. And just last year, we were talking about a wonderful film from the Mandala Theatre Company and the young people that formed that group. A series of short stories on countering loneliness and young people's experiences through the pandemic. So, it's a wonderful place to enjoy, some beautiful cinema, but it's also a place for communities to come together and kind of tell their stories.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of independent cinemas. Obviously, I like going to the Odeon and the Curzon as much as the next person, but actually, it's independent cinemas who can have those relationships with their community and the local schools and charities and filmmakers. It's where people come to. Independent cinemas are where people come to who want to further their love of film in a really sort of community-based way. Obviously, I would say that, but that's what I feel, and I hope, and I know that a lot of people love the cinema for the same reason.
Totally. And you've been leading it now for quite some time, going back before the pandemic. And it's been quite a journey for you all in that period, not just to survive that difficult period, but in quite a fundamental change in how you operate. So what brought you to the UPP and the role, and kind of what excites you about it personally?
Well, as you said in your introduction, I've been sort of an arts culture administrator in Oxford for basically all of my career, working at some of the best and best cultural organisations here, if I do say so myself. And so I've always, for me personally, I do have a sense that I really want to make sure that people can experience culture, whether that's theatre, reading, performance, dance, cinema, making sure that people can enjoy that no matter what their background is, and making sure that it's affordable. And I guess on a personal note, when I moved to Oxford when I was 17 years old, I was going through a pretty difficult time in my life. I just was recovering from a stroke. And I found the film culture here and the cinemas here were my solace. Going to the UPP, going to the Phoenix, having that dark space and to discover stories, that was really what gave me sort of the film cinema bug. And so when the job came up for being the director of the Ultimate Picture Palace, I really sort of was like, yes, I'd love to do that. And it was in 2019. I thought that would be a lovely job for a few years. It won't be stressful at all. It's just a small little independent cinema. How hard could it be? And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and we know what happened then. It was a very difficult time for a lot of community organisations and businesses around the country.
For sure, yeah, absolutely. And you've weathered that. We've come out the other side. I don't think it's an overstatement to say, stronger and kind of more powerful than ever in your voice and in the role that you play in the community. And a big part of that has been this refounding as a community-owned model. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about that journey and how different it is in the way you operate?
Yeah,
today?
I'd love to. So the UPP's journey to community ownership was maybe a little bit of a different one to organisations who are starting up and wanting to be a community-owned business from the get-go. So for 15 years before I joined, the cinema was owned by a wonderful local resident called Becky Hall-Smith, who ran the cinema beautifully. And unfortunately, in 2018, she passed away from cancer. And at the time, she was very clear-headed about the fact that it was really important that the UPP stayed independent. It's been an independent cinema for a very long time, and it had a sustainable future. And she asked a number of her friends and her family to look into what it would be like to set up a cooperative or something like this to make sure that the cinema was always going to be an independent cinema and community owned. And this group of people said yes, and they didn't really know they didn't really know how long it would take, and they thought, maybe it will take about a year or so to get this set up. I remember going to the first community meeting of when the cinema was, this idea was floated. It was standing room only. People were really interested in this idea, and that was in 2019, and it then took until 2022, so 3 years of hard work to get the Community Benefit Society set up. For us to float a community share offer, we needed to raise £360,000 to buy the cinema off of the estate of Becky Hall-Smith. But it was miraculous, the amount of love and investment that came pouring in from local people. We had, in the end, 1,300 local people buy community shares in our Community Benefit Society so that we could purchase the cinema on behalf of the community. And, I'm very sure in my mind that we wouldn't be as successful a community business as we are today if we weren't a community-owned society. People, the people who come through our doors, our regulars, most of them all own a share in the cinema. They wait, the 3 or 4 weeks, because we show our films about 4 weeks after the normal cinemas do. They wait to see the films at their cinema that they own, and they are our best advocates. They volunteer with us. They donate to us. They give our vouchers for presents. They are keeping us afloat. So we're very early on in our journey of being community owned, but I've seen the benefits in the first few years for sure.
Yeah, and you speak about it very sort of passionately and fluently in terms of, there is that sense of a decline in the high street and also in cultural venues. And, since through and off the back of the pandemic, this decline in, the number of visits to cinemas that people are undertaking these days with streaming services are down 40% by one study that I read. And you've actually increased your turnover. Yeah. You're holding steady on your numbers. And as you say, I'm sure a huge part of that is people's relationship to the place. Absolutely.
And it's also, I think, given us a new sense of direction in terms of who and what we're for. It's very clear now that, when we're making decisions about what we show, with the partners that we work with, how much our tickets are going to cost. It's all coming back to a sense of, what's the community mission, what's the social mission for the cinema, and the fact that we are run by a democratically elected management committee who truly represent the views of the community shareholders. That gives us such a clear sense of direction that I hope is really palpable in when people come to the cinema, they feel like they're not entering just a normal cinema to watch a film. They're actually entering a real, space that is completely loved and I hope that that's clear.
No, you get that sense, I think, and I really enjoy learning how many people are part of that sort of 1,300 that own it, that are based in the community, and how much they talk about it with a great sense of pride. And we talk about the idea of spatial justice at Make Space as something that drives us, and a core dimension of that being this idea of community ownership or stewardship. And it just fundamentally changes, I think, people's relationship to their place and their neighbourhood.
Yes.
And I think you're a sort of beautiful, living, breathing example of that. And I suppose at this moment, at no other time in history is it more important that you have that sort of democratic backing and that love and that care, because you're, all is not plain sailing in the cultural industries, even if and when you are a community-owned organisation. And so whilst UPP is community-owned in and of itself, the relationship to the building you call home and where the magic happens is not yet secure and fully owned. You're on a leasehold, and recently the ownership of the building changed hands, and it's now become clear that potentially that lease could be under threat, and it may not be possible to renew it. So do you want to say a little bit more about the challenging position you're currently in and how you're responding to that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. As you mentioned, we, organisations like ours rely on stability, really. And last year we learnt that our landlord, one of the Oxford University colleges, Oriel College, will have not committed to renewing our lease beyond the current term, which is 11 years' time. So we have our current lease ends in 2037, which is 11 years, which seems like a long time to some people, but actually for a business like ours, which is, in an industry like ours, which is changing all the time, and we need to be able to invest in our building. Our Grade 2 listed cinema is wonderful in lots of ways, but also has lots of accessibility issues, customer experience issues. Like if you are, under 5'7" and you're sitting in the back half of the cinema, you can't see the bottom of the screen. And also it's a leaky old building where it's not energy efficient to run. We desperately need to make investments in our building, and with it only an 11-year lease, it means that we can't bid for public funds in order to address some of those issues. And the reality of that is that we cannot commit. We are not going to be commercially viable in 2 or 3 years' time if we're not able to invest in our building. So, yes, we need a longer lease. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing in the coming weeks, at the time of the recording, we're in February, but, in March, we are hoping to make a very public and persuasive argument to Oriel College to ask them to join with us and to see the long-term benefits of partnering with us to give us a longer lease, because Oxford needs an independent cinema that it can call its own, and we see that there are lots of benefits to the university and to the college for sharing the space. If they need it for a lecture theatre, if they need it for a theatre, we can make that happen. But it's really important that the UPP stays a public cinema run by the community for the community.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, this is very live and unfolding, and so The terrain's likely to and subject to change. But what are currently Oriel College's plans for the site?
I'm not too sure. I know that they do have a number of properties around the cinema site itself. So they have spoken about a redevelopment for some kind of student housing, things like this. My guess is that they're wanting to keep their options open in terms of redevelopment. And so that's why, maybe understandably, that it's hard for them to commit to a lease in 11 years' time because they don't quite know what they want to do with it. But it's really important that for the future of our cultural venue and for our cinema, that we have some stability so that we can invest and we can go on to be the really amazingly performing and important cultural venue that we are for the community.
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. Well, we wish you all the very best with the campaign.
Maybe I'll come back and tell you how we're going along.
Yes, well, we'll be watching it very closely and definitely sort of, trumpeting from the sidelines in whatever way we can for your, for the next 100 years of your operation, because, as you say, it's vitally important. There's 1,300 people who've put their hat in the ring and backed you, have got involved in your governance or contributed financially, and there's thousands more that are involved in its history and want to see it succeed. So, yeah, and there is such a beautiful opportunity, isn't there, as you've just articulated, for that cinema to continue to be at the heart of any new regeneration or development that the college wants to push forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, there are so many similarities in terms of, educational institutions. They have their students at the heart of their thought
Their
processes.
mission, yeah.
And so do we. We are essentially, we are a space where we want to have students and be a space for conversation and exploration and stories. So there's a lot of synergy that I can see. So hopefully we can just nudge them in the right direction.
Yes, indeed. Well, here's hoping. So drawing us, on that note, and I think we'll come back at the end to just sort of focus in on how people can get involved in backing that really important campaign. But before we do, we'd just like to invite you, as part of all of these episodes, to offer up an ingredient for this glimpse of a possible future that we all want to be part of. And so coming back to the core question, as part of this Glimpses of a Possible Future series, is inviting you to offer up an ingredient for this future we all want to be part of, one that builds towards spatial justice and fosters a sense of belonging and centres health, equity and joy. So what, from all that you've learned from your many roles, but especially from your current role leading UPP, would you like to offer up?
That's a beautiful question. I think I'd like to put into the pot the plurality of voices. And I know that sounds like a really mealy-mouthed way of saying, basically, I think people and organizations who are in this sort of world and doing this kind of work need to be able to listen to as many voices and as possible in order to make the greatest amount of impact as possible. The UPP wouldn't be where it is today if we hadn't have opened ourselves up to listening to getting so many people involved in the cinema and invested in the cinema. One example which I really like to tell people about, and I think it surprises a lot of people about when I say I run a cinema. They say, it must be nice to choose the films, right? At the cinema, at the UPP, we don't just have one programmer who makes all the choices about what comes onto our screens. one of the reasons why we are actually one of the best performing in one-screen cinemas in the country is because we have a programming group that democratically decides what goes onto our screens. And these are made up of shareholders, volunteers, our staff members, who all bring to the table their different, preferences in terms of films, genres, the kind of things that they want to see on our screen. And that's just one small way that I can, it's an example of how we make sure that actually we are representing our community in a really fair way, but also it has made commercial sense as well and community sense. It means that we are not just targeting one kind of audience, throughout the week. We are making sure that there's something on the screen for everyone, and that's what I'm really proud of, but also I think that others can learn from as well.
Yeah, really hear that and see it as well when you're seeing the queues forming on a Friday night around the corner.
Yeah.
It is a wonderful melting pot of the many different facets of the East Oxford community and further afield. And I think that's a really good reminder and core to this wonderful community ownership model that you've built, which is how to bring in all of those different voices and help it shape you and make you stronger. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing the story. And, let's tune into what next. How can people get involved in, well, obviously they need to come down and visit you. If they're not already members, they need to sign up.
Please.
And, back your local, unique community-owned cinema. But also, how do they get behind the campaign so that we can make sure that you actually, you're not just community-owned as an organisation, but your asset becomes community-owned as well? Yeah,
thank you. So the best thing you can do right now is to sign up to our mailing list, because at the time of the recording, we do not have any kind of specific webpage to send you to. So if you sign up to our mailing list...
We'll add it in the show notes, so that's
okay,
fine.
Great.
That'll be an easy click through.
Then we will tell you how you can get involved. And basically, we really want everyone who loves cinema, who loves film, who has a memory of loving and watching cinema in Oxford, to get involved in this project and get involved in this campaign. You could give money to this campaign. You could put a poster in your window. You could sign our petition that we'll be getting up. There's lots of ways that you can get involved and help and really make a difference to our future.
Brilliant. Yeah. And share it as widely as you can with all your friends and networks. Thank you so much, Micaela. And it's been really lovely talking to you. Thank you for listening to Glimpses of a Possible Future. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, or why not share it with a friend?